You jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka, noozle, bippity bop, she-gall. You jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka, noozle, bippity bop, she-gall. I mean, you keep on talking, but you don't know where to turn.
Good evening. Welcome to the weekend. I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute. Easy for you to say. You're watching Independent thinking, well, they're at it again. The Democrats in the legislature are looking at changing the Constitution without a vote from you, the people. It's something called the Bird-Arveschoug Amendment, and it sounds boring at first, but let me tell you, it's much more important than anything else that's going on this year in the legislature. From the Independence Institute, our famed economist, Poulson. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John.
The one tenured professor up at CU. I hope you keep your job.
Thank you.
That would be one. When are they going to fire you, like Ford Churchill, by the way? Is that anytime soon?
I have not been involved in that. Don't pay any attention to it.
Oh, that's too bad. It's fun. Senate Minority Leader Josh Penry, I appreciate you coming along.
Thanks for having me, John. Pleasure to be here.
Explain this 6% limit. I know you're an economist, so I'm going to ask you to try to put it into English, but there is something in statute that we also say is in Constitution. It's called Bird-Arveschoug. Who is Bird? Who is Arveschoug? Why are they important?
Well, of course, Mike Bird was president of the Senate back in 1992, and Arveschoug was, I think, a representative, and they enacted a change in the tax and spending limits that, in effect, imposes a 6% cap on the growth of general fund spending. And essentially what that means is any revenue in excess of that 6% cap goes into the transportation and capital projects. And I think the important part of Bird-Arveschoug at this point is that what Tabor says is that existing tax and spending limits cannot be weakened without a vote of the people. So in effect, what that did was put the 6% cap into the Constitution. And so our understanding is that can only be changed if you change the Constitution.
For those who don't remember the history of this, since we have so many new people in Colorado, we forget where this comes from. And Tabor was put on the ballot back in 1990 and lost by a whisker. And it was obvious that the people were getting demanding some more accountability and wanted something on sort of tax reduction, tax limitation. So the people in the legislature, led by Casey, the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Casey, really were the ones pushing for this Bird-Arveschoug Amendment as a way to hold off Tabor. It said, let's do something that limits the growth of government, and hopefully Douglas Bruce and Tabor won't be able to pass. And when Doug Bruce wrote Tabor, he wrote it specifically to include Bird-Arveschoug, which says after 6%, that money cannot go into regular programs. And this is the point that I think confuses a lot of people. Bird-Arveschoug doesn't say government can only grow 6%, that anything after that gets returned to the people. What happens after 6%? What happens to the rest of that money?
What the spending limit says is that the operating budget, schools, higher education, human services, that part of the budget can only grow at 6%. And then everything that comes in above that, up until a certain point, goes to roads and capital, one-time expenses. The idea was a simple one. One, to limit the growth of permanent programs, those big government ideas that at the time and now have many people concerned in terms of the rate of their growth. But the second idea was equally important, and that is that last dollar in is also, when the economy turns bad, the first dollar to go away. So rather than using that to build permanent programs that you'll have to cut when the recession happens, spend it on one-time expenses. And that's actually, if you look at California and New York and the really draconian cuts they've had to make because they didn't have a spending cap, I think it's really vindicated the spending limit strategy in Colorado.
For those people, put it a different way, when Reagan said there's nothing closer to immortality than a new government program, what he really meant was when you put a dollar into what you call operating programs, those, whatever you put in there must be spent the next year at a higher rate, and the year after that at a higher rate, and the year after that. Those are wealth transfers, those are welfare programs, Medicaid programs, whatever they are, and however well-intentioned. Once you put a dollar there, you can't pull it back without a huge constituency going. So the idea is after that 6%, the money goes into basically roads. Would that be the right way? That's right. One-time money, and if there's money there, we build the roads, we build new buildings on college campuses for lofty professors like you, and if the money's not there, it doesn't get built.
Oh, that's right. Josh is right. Essentially, I think the intent of Bird-Arveschoug was to basically spend one-time monies for one-time projects, and that's what it did. If you have surplus money, that's one-time money. You're not likely to have that every year. So you want to put that into one-time projects like capital spending or highway projects. You don't want to put those dollars into ongoing programs, because when you do that, that means that you're basically boosting that budget for ongoing programs. And that's fine when the economy is growing and revenue's flowing in. But when you have a recession and you have a revenue shortfall, now you have a problem financing that higher level of budget. And that's when we get into periods where there's demand for higher taxes, issuing more debt, trying to boost that revenue to meet that higher budget. And what Bird Arveschoug does is to prevent that from happening.
Let me oversimplify this. If we didn't have this combination of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which basically constitutionalized the 6% limit called Bird Arveschoug, would Colorado look a lot more like California right now?
There's no question. This year, in the current fiscal year, we're going to cut about $500 million. In conversations with our economists, had Bird Arveschoug not been in place, this spending limit, and we spent all of that money on permanent programs rather than on one-time expenses, which is not a stretch of the imagination given behavior in the legislature, our cuts would be well in excess of $1 billion. And so what it does is it really exacerbates this sort of binge and purge approach to spending. When the economy's good, you run up spending. When the economy tanks, you either cut spending or, as Barry said, the professor said, more importantly, you raise taxes or you borrow money in order to balance your budget. It's what's happening in California or New York, and it's budget insanity is what it is.
We'll talk about the constitutional part of this.
Yeah.
For those of us who are old enough, we remember Bird Arveschoug was there to try to stem away Tabor. Tabor was written to include, as you put, any spending limitation that is on the books now will be considered part of the Constitution. And since 1992, Legislative Legal Services, this is the department you guys use to depend on your stuff, your legal opinions, have said Bird Arveschoug is now part of the Constitution. Why that's important is because if it's in the Constitution, you guys can't change it. That's
correct. I mean, Tabor has a very clear statement that says spending limits, which this Bird Arveschoug amendment is, if they're to be weakened, meaning the government can spend more or the operations are less effective, they have to go to a vote of the people. Our lawyers in the building, they're not partisan, they're nonpartisan, that we rely on them, as you point out. They have said clearly and consistently over time, this has to go to a vote of the people in order to be changed. It's sort of, to some, it's a trite issue. To many of us, it really goes to the fundamentals. If this is in the Constitution and you want to change it, then go make your case to the people. Unfortunately, it's part of a broader habit of people in the General Assembly and, frankly, this governor, that they don't like Tabor, and so they have a tendency to ignore it.
What changed here? What changed that last year this was you needed to go to the people? A couple of years back when Tabor was under assault, you and I and other politicos were involved in all sorts of roundtable discussions. The treasurer at the time had one that lasted for months. There were liberal organizations like Bell and Bighorn and the Institute for Fiscal Studies. There was all sorts of folks. And everyone agreed the only way to change Bird Arveschoug is through a vote of the people. And now, overnight, you don't need to. What the hell happened?
Well, I think basically what the governor and the Democrats are saying is that we think that we can change these tax and spending limits without a vote of the people. And it's actually part of a continuous pattern of weakening and ultimately, I think, trying to eliminate these tax and spending limits. As you know, what happened in 2005, they basically weakened the Tabor Amendment. They changed the way that the Tabor limit is applied. And that, of course, I think is a violation of the Constitution. Last year,
they did that with a statutory change, not,
right,
not with a constitutional change.